The easiest way to win more games is to make fewer mistakes. More often than not, our opponent isn't better than us, we just find ways to beat ourselves. So in this video, I'm going over 10 huge mistakes that Madden players make, and if you can fix these 10 mistakes, then I promise that you will win more games. So if that sounds good to you, then let's get started. So the first huge mistake that way too many Madden players make is not having a goal line offense. The pro player Lambo once tweeted, "I learned today you can never go into a tournament without red zone or goal line offense." And it is crazy how many Madden players have a great offense going up and down the field, but when they get inside the 10-yard line or inside the 5-yard line, their offense completely stalls out because they don't have a specific game plan to get the ball into the end zone. And so right here, I want to show you guys a little goal line personnel trick that we can do to almost guarantee that we punch the ball into the end zone every single time. And so to start, I like to find a play that attacks the edge, like a jet touch pass or a halfback stretch. And in this case, I'm in the Bills playbook. I'm in the formation gun normal Y off close, and we have a jet touch pass. Now, when we get down inside the 5-yard line, if our opponent comes out in goal line defense, what we're going to do is go ahead and snap this ball, and that's going to allow us to attack the edge. And because our opponent is in goal line, we're going to have a really easy time turning the corner and scoring a touchdown. But you may be saying, well, what if my opponent doesn't come out in goal line? That is where our goal line personnel trick is going to come in handy. And so what we're going to do in our formation, again, I'm going to be in gun normal Y off close, but you could do this with a jet touch pass, a halfback stretch, in pretty much any formation that you want. But what we're going to do is we're going to sub in goal line personnel. And goal line personnel is having 2 running backs and 3 tight ends on the field. So from the formation screen, I'm going to press wire triangle for substitution, and I'm going to sub in a running back at my slot receiver right here. So we'll put in Mr. Davis right here. And then on the outside, I'm going to sub in tight ends at both of these receiver spots. Now I have 2 running backs and 3 tight ends out on the field. I'm going to come out in the same play as before, jet touch pass. And if our opponent is in goal line, again, we're going to run the exact same thing. We're going to attack the edge because them being in goal line means they have a huge disadvantage when it comes to guarding these plays that attack the outside. However, let's say they don't come out in goal line. Let's say because you're in something like gun normal Y off close, they come out in something like a 4-down lineman set, like nickel over or something. In that case, the goal line personnel trick is going to allow us to audible into the goal line formation. So let's try to crowd the box a little bit, like they maybe actually would do in a real game situation. In this case, we don't really want to run jet touch pass because the defense is much better equipped and aligned to guard the outside. But because we have 3 tight ends and 2 running backs on the field, all we have to do is press extra square to pull up our audibles menu, press 1 click to the right on the D-pad, and now we have all of our goal line audibles. And we can audible into halfback dive, halfback sting, whatever we want. And now we are running the ball in goal line against a 4-down lineman set, and we are easily getting into the end zone. This is such a powerful trick. It's so good, and I strongly recommend that if you're struggling to score when you get down inside the 5-yard line, that you try to implement this goal line personnel trick. It's so tough to stop, and it's so reliable. Someone in our Discord said they had a 100% success rate in the 5 or 6 times that they used it, and it makes sense because it is almost impossible for the defense to do anything against this. But because so many Madden players struggle inside the 5-yard line, that's why in all of our ebooks now on playbookprofessor.gg, we have a short yardage section of plays specifically designed to help you punch it into the end zone so that you never have to worry again about scoring when you get down near the goal line. Now, speaking of schemes, that brings us to huge mistake number 2 that way too many Madden players make, which is not having an actual scheme. Guys, there are way too many times where I ask someone what offense they're in, and they'll say, oh, I'm in the Bills playbook, I'm in the Chiefs playbook, but they don't have an actual formation. They're either calling coach suggestions or just calling random plays from throughout the whole playbook. Please do not use coach suggestions. Have an actual scheme. What I mean by having an actual scheme is that you should have 1 or 2 or at most 3 formations that you have mastered. Meaning you have a bunch of different plays and setups within each formation that you can run. In the Bills playbook, I run gun normal Y off close and gun double Z close weak. I may throw in a little bit of gun trips tight end here and there, but mainly I'm in gun normal Y off close and gun double Z close weak. And what happens is, the more setups that we have out of a particular formation, the more we leave our opponent clueless about what we might be doing on the offensive side of the ball. And so if I'm in gun normal Y off close, I may be running our base play, which is this play right here out of cheat flat X post, but my opponent doesn't know that because they just know I'm in gun normal Y off close. I may be running this setup out of the play Y sail, but again, my opponent doesn't know that because they don't know which way my guys are going to run. Or I might be running this setup out of the play mesh spot. We have so many different ways to attack the defense, but to them, it just looks the same pre-snap. So please have an actual scheme where you focus on mastering just a couple of formations. If you just have random money plays scattered throughout your playbook, and anytime you call that formation, it's only going to be that play, any halfway decent opponent will pick up on that in just 1 or 2 drives and will start shutting you down. I strongly encourage everyone to have an actual scheme. Have 1 or 2 formations and then be really deep within those formations. Have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different setups out of a particular formation. And that is going to make you incredibly difficult to stop whenever you're on offense. Now, moving on to huge mistake number 3, we have failing to make defensive adjustments. It is actually crazy how many times I see people either in Discord or in YouTube comments talking about, oh my gosh, this guy was doing this to me all game long. And I just think to myself, well, why didn't you make an adjustment to stop it? Because we have the capability to do that. And so right here, for example, I have a simple flood concept on the field, and I have the defense in a cover 3 shell. And so let's say that your opponent was hitting you with this corner route all game long, where they're just flooding that far sideline, and they are getting easy yards on the outside against your zone coverage. Well, we have ways that we can adjust to take that away. We can do a 25-yard curl flat to take it away. We can man it up. We can drop our outside cornerback back in a light blue flat to like 20 or 25 yards if we want. And we can even look at that right now. We can do a 25-yard curl flat in our coaching adjustments. We can go back to cover 3 sky, and we can do the exact same thing. But the main thing I want to focus on, guys, is you want to take away whatever your opponent is doing. And so in this particular case, if we want to take away the corner route, we would just go ahead and put our linebacker on this 25-yard curl flat over here. And now when our opponent goes to run that same route combo, this time the linebacker in the 25-yard curl flat is going to take away the corner route. If we go ahead and snap it, we can see that he's just going to be out there and he's just going to completely bag the corner route. And so that's a simple way to adjust and take it away. Other people will say, oh my gosh, I couldn't stop this quarterback who was just scrambling all game. But again, we have tools to stop that. You can double tap RB or R1 to put your defensive ends in QB contains, and this will be best if you have a 4-man rush, and especially if your defensive ends are lined up well outside of the offensive tackles, and they're going to do a really good job of shutting down any QB scramble that your opponent tries to do. If you don't want a QB contain, and we'll talk about why maybe you don't want a QB contain in just a second, you could, of course, use a QB spy, which is individual adjustments and then left on the right stick. And then if your opponent tries to scramble, then, oh, looks like we have some auto motion here. But then if your opponent tries to scramble in any direction, not only will maybe the D-line shed anyway, but as you saw, the QB spy was matching him as well. And so we have all kinds of tools on defense to adjust to our opponent. And so I know this sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people will allow their opponent to do the same thing over and over and over again all game long. And so the takeaway is make your opponent adjust to your adjustments. If your opponent is doing something over and over again, like if they're hitting a corner route on a flood concept on the far sideline, go ahead and put a 25-yard curl flat out there. Take away their corner route. Obviously now that opens up the middle of the field a little bit more, but force them to use the middle of the field. And if they stop putting the corner route on the field, then you can adjust back and say, okay, if they're not going to run the corner route for a while, I'll go ahead and leave this linebacker on a hook curl again. That's the chess match. That's the game of cat and mouse that can make Madden so fun. And that is where, if you're not adjusting on the defensive side of the ball and you're just allowing your opponent to do the same thing over and over again, you will lose a lot of games. And so I realize that this sounds obvious, but that's the thing about most of our mistakes in our games. they are very simple things that we, for some reason, fail to do anyway. And I think it's because there's just a lot of things to process in a game of Madden. There are so many different things on the field to distract our brain. But please, use your defensive adjustments, adjust to your opponent, make them do something new. Don't get beat by the same thing over and over again. And just doing that, I promise, will help you win more games. But now let's get a little bit more specific. And a second ago, I said we'd talk about QB contain some more. So huge mistake number 4 is QB containing on every play. I have seen a surprising number of people struggle from this, but what you need to know is that QB contains are programmed in the game to shed way slower than non-QB contains. So I know that people worry about QB scrambles and QB rollouts, but if you are QB containing every play, the quarterback is going to have all the time in the world to throw in the pocket. And so right here, if I snap this ball, what you're going to see is that we're going to have a very clean pocket. Now, eventually, of course, a defensive tackle did shed, but you saw we had a while to throw. And in Madden, if you have a while to throw, you can do a lot of damage. I think it was about a month ago, there was someone in the Playbook Professor Discord, and they said, I don't understand. I don't get any sheds in any game ever. And we asked them to post some clips. And we looked at the clips. Sure enough, they were QB containing on every single play. And so sure enough, their opponent had a clean pocket and had at least 3 or 4 seconds to throw every single time. Compare that to if you don't QB contain, what you're gonna see is that these sheds are gonna all happen way faster. Did you see how fast the end shed that time? It's a night and day difference between when he's on a QB contain and when he's not on a QB contain. He absolutely threw him off, and that was a sack in not that much time. So if you're QB containing on defense because you're worried about your opponent scrambling, it can be a good adjustment if your opponent is scrambling a lot, but you have to understand that it comes with the downside of the sheds will be way slower. And so if your opponent isn't scrambling a lot, I definitely recommend not QB containing, because when you QB contain, and it looks like Josh Allen fumbled right there, but you guys still saw how long we had in the pocket. The point is that the sheds are significantly different on a QB contain versus not on a QB contain. So if you want to get organic pass rush, don't QB contain. If you want to give your opponent all the time in the world to throw, then go ahead and QB contain. Now, on the subject of pass rush, we have another huge mistake. And this is huge mistake number 5, which is using a 3-man rush. This is another mistake that so many people make, and it again has to do with how the game is coded. So let's go over to the formation nickel 3-3. We'll call the play cover 2 drop. And so what people don't realize is that the game is coded very differently for 3-man rushes versus 4-man rushes. And so right here, I'm going to snap the ball and we're going to see just a 3-man rush come in. And it's going to be kind of similar to the QB contains in that we're going to have a lot of time to throw. We have a really clean pocket right here against this 3-man rush. Now, I know that there are probably some people watching who are saying, obviously, you have a lot of time to throw. It's 3 rushers against 5 blockers. That makes sense that you'd have a ton of time to throw. But I promise you, it's not just that. It's in the coding of the game as well. Because what we need to look at now is the exact same play, but on defense, I'm going to take my user, put him on a blitz assignment, and start near the line of scrimmage. The game is now going to see this as a 4-man rush. Even though my user is not actually going to rush the quarterback, when we snap this ball, what's going to happen is that the 3-man rush ends up shedding way faster. You guys can go back and look, but I think it's pretty obvious. When you have a blitzed user on the field, this is just a trick that's been around for several years now. When you blitz your user, you get much faster sheds because the game is seeing this as a 4-man rush, even though you're only sending 3 players. So the mistake is if you're only sending 3 and you're not blitzing your user, what you're going to end up with is a pass rush that just never comes in. A pass rush that allows the quarterback to have almost infinite time in the pocket. Or, I mean, what was that, like 6 or 7 seconds? Something crazy. But if you blitz your user, that is how you can get around it. And so, again, I've seen this so many times, whether it's coaching or whether it is in the Discord. People are like, I'm not getting any sheds at all. And it's because they're running a 3-man pass rush and they're not blitzing their user. Now, I don't love this because when you blitz your user, you take away the ability to switch stick, which is a really, really powerful mechanic in the game. But if you're not switch sticking anyway, and you want to just get away with having a 3-man rush, all you have to do is blitz your user, and then the sheds are going to be so much faster, guys. Like, it's absolutely insane. So if you're using a 3-man rush, please just blitz your user. But whatever you do, please do not send just 3 rushers, because if you send just 3 rushers without blitzing your user, then the pass rush is never going to come in. Now, staying on the defensive side of the ball, huge mistake number 6 that way too many Madden players make is usering incorrectly. Your user is the most powerful person on defense, but if we're not using him correctly, then we are not going to be playing very good defense. Now, right off the bat, I hope everyone knows you should not be usering with a defensive lineman. If you're trying to do pass rush moves or bull rushes or whatever with your user on a defensive lineman, that is not a good use of your user. You want your user to be in coverage, almost always using with someone in the middle of the field. This gives you the most versatility and allows you to cover the most ground. And if you have your user in a zone or really any assignment that's not a blitz assignment, you can also switch stick after the snap and basically cover the entire field. But that's not even the focus of this video right now. We're not talking about switch stick. We're simply going to talk about the positioning of your user. So if we look at this coverage right here, I'd say it is pretty obvious where our user should be covering. Our user should be covering in this zone in the middle of the field. What can often happen though, and I see this in Discord clips and in coaching sessions, I see people forget what part of the field their user is responsible for. And so for example, I was coaching someone and he probably had a coverage something like this, and his opponent kept throwing to the running back in the flat. He was in something like this, and his opponent kept throwing to the running back in the flat. And so he was telling me as we were watching back his gameplay footage, he was telling me that he was like, no matter what, I wanted to make sure that he couldn't throw to his running back. And so what he started doing after the snap, and remember, this is his coverage, is the ball gets snapped and he would sprint after the running back in the flat and completely ignore his assignment over the middle of the field. And sure enough, his opponent started hitting the middle of the field. So if we go ahead and, like, say, for example, put the tight end on an in route or something, sure enough, when he was vacating the middle of the field ended up being wide open and his opponent started throwing to it. So like if I tried to do this again with 2 controllers, which is always a little bit of a challenge, but like right here, it's like, oh, his user stopped guarding the middle of the field. Well, guess what? His opponent started attacking the middle of the field. And so this really goes hand in hand with our earlier mistake about not adjusting on defense. In this particular case, if your opponent is setting their running back on a flat route, you don't have to go and user the flat. You can simply shade your coverage down and have your outside cornerback, for example, guard the hard flat. And that allows your user to continue guarding over the middle of the field. So we always want to use common sense and user in the correct spot. If we have a particular zone of the field that our user is responsible for, we need to actually guard that. And I realize that this is another tip that sounds like common sense. It sounds super obvious, but I'm willing to bet that if you go back and watch some of the gameplay of your losses, you will find more than one instance where your user was not in the proper position. And if he had been in the proper position, maybe you get a stop, maybe you force a turnover. And so being in the correct position with your user and using properly is extremely important for winning more games. And of course, if you want to get more advanced with your user, then we can talk about switch stick. And if you're not using switch stick or don't know what it is, it's simply the new mechanic that after the snap, you can flick your right stick in any direction and take control of the player that you flick your right stick towards. And so in this particular case, if the outside receiver, the X receiver was on, say, a streak, and I don't actually have a zone guarding it, well, the good news is that I can use the switch stick to, after the snap, take control of the safety in the deep half, and then fly over here and guard that streak. That is a little bit more advanced. I think that the best players in the world this year have definitely mastered switch stick, but the rest of the player base has not quite caught up yet. There are a lot of people not using switch stick. And so if you really want to make your defense better, then get into practice mode and practice switch sticking around, because it is one of the single biggest skill gaps in the game right now on the defensive side of the ball. But we've been on the defensive side of the ball for a while, so let's hop back to offense, and that brings us to huge mistake number 7, which is locking on to one receiver. And so right here on offense, I have us in a beautiful route combo. It's a 4x1 set, so it turns off match coverage. We have a flood concept on the left side. We have a man-beating drag. We have a man-beating deep dig. This is just a really awesome route combo. I love it. What Madden players will often get sucked into, though, is they'll put a beautiful route combo on the field. Either they came up with it themselves or they learned it in an ebook, but they won't actually look at all the routes. They will decide before the snap which route they want to throw to. And in this particular case, I would say the most popular one that people would lock onto would be the corner route right here. And when you decide before the snap which route you're going to throw to, you are just asking to throw an interception. If I snap this ball right here, we still have the curl flats on 25-yard zone drops, and now we're just chucking into double coverage. And guess what? If we go back and look at the route combo, we had a lot of stuff open. This running back completely unguarded in the flat on this side. This tight end completely unguarded in the flat on this side. And so if you don't actually utilize all the routes on the field, if you just lock on to one receiver, then you are setting yourself up for failure. And if you guys watched the previous video I uploaded, the 7 secrets to master passing in Madden 25, this simply is another way of talking about having a read progression. A read progression is simply the order in which you look at the routes, and the order that you look at the routes is based on which routes can get open first. And so on this route combo, the routes that can get open first are going to be the drag and the flat route. If we snap the ball, we should be looking at either the drag or the flat route first. I would say maybe we read the drag, then to the flat, then up to the corner route, then back to the dig. And if we snap this ball right here, in this particular case, since my user was on the linebacker and didn't actually move, the drag was covered. If we go ahead and click off of him, then I think that there's a good chance the drag will be open this time. But it doesn't matter that much which one we read. The important thing is that we are reading our low routes before our high routes. We are reading our routes that can come open first and then progressing to our routes that come open late. But what we absolutely cannot do is just lock on to one receiver. And I see it in so many Discord clips. I see it in so many coaching sessions where they're like, oh, I've got this really great route combo. It gets the corner route open. Maybe it got the corner route open last time. That doesn't mean the corner route will be open this time. Every single play, you have to go through a read progression. You have to utilize and look at all of your routes on the field. And if you decide before the snap that you're going to throw to one receiver and one receiver only, and just close your eyes and hope he's open, and you're going to throw a lot of interceptions, and you will lose a lot more games because of it. And that brings us to huge mistake number 8, which is mismanaging the clock. And for this, I want to show you guys a game that I played on stream earlier this year, where I got the ball back with a little over 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and I was down by 4 points. In this situation, the number one thing on my mind is that not only do I need to score a touchdown, but I want to score a touchdown with almost no time left on the clock. I do not want to give my opponent the opportunity to have time on the clock, especially if they have timeouts, and then go down the field and either get into field goal range or score a touchdown themselves. Managing the clock is huge. If you can manage the clock well, that's almost better than playing great defense, because the best way to prevent your opponent from scoring is making sure they never even get the ball. And so right here, what I'm thinking about is I'm going to try and get to midfield. And once I get to midfield, I'm just going to make sure I run the ball and just really chew the clock and at least get to the 2-minute warning. And as long as I have all 3 timeouts, I am very comfortable. Even if I'm 30 or 40 or 45 yards away, even if there's only a minute left, if I have all 3 timeouts, I feel extremely comfortable. And so that's exactly what I end up doing. I run the ball, and then I am just using some motion as a distraction, but ultimately I'm just trying to run the ball and get us down to the 2-minute warning, and then that's when the drive really starts. And I'll cut it down so you guys don't have to watch the entire drive, but as you can see right here, we are all the way down to 1:14. It is 2nd and 7, and I am still out on the 40-yard line. Well, now I'm getting down inside the 30-yard line, but I'm still not worried. Like I said, my number one priority is killing this clock. And if you have all 3 timeouts, then running the ball and milking clock is not a concern at all. And now the one thing that is a little bit different about this example is that it is back when there was no clock runoff in online games. And so depending on whether there's clock runoff or no clock runoff, you'll of course manage the clock a little bit differently, but the principle is still the same, that if you have all 3 of your timeouts and you're within 30 yards, you should have no problem scoring a touchdown on that drive. And so right here, I get the ball to my running back on a flat route. I get out of bounds with 30 seconds left. And at this point, now that we're under 30 seconds, now I'm kind of okay with scoring a touchdown if it's available, because that leaves my opponent not very much time to work with. But the number one thing is just making sure we don't give them the ball back with 1 or 2 minutes left, because that's all the time in the world. And so what ends up happening on this drive is I get to 1st and goal with all 3 of my timeouts. Then I'm like, okay, well, I can just run the ball 3 times and I don't have to call timeout right away. I can even run the clock down to, I guess I chose 18 seconds to call my timeout on 2nd and goal. And then on 2nd and goal, I run the ball from the 1 yard line and I do get stopped, but that's perfectly okay. And I'm going to go ahead and run the clock even more and call the timeout with 11 seconds left on 3rd and goal. And that way it's like, okay, if I get stopped on the 3rd and goal, then the 4th and goal play will just be the final play of the game. And if I do score on 3rd and goal, well, then at least my opponent only will have like 8 or 9 seconds left. And sure enough, on the 3rd and goal play, after flipping the formation, I was able to punch it into the end zone with wide zone. And there are 8 seconds left, and my opponent really didn't have a chance to do a whole lot of anything. And by managing the clock properly, I was able to secure that win. So clock management really is one of those underrated skills that people don't talk about enough. If you can manage the clock well at the end of halves and at the end of games, it gives you such a huge advantage, because like I said before, the best way you can prevent your opponent from scoring is to make sure they never even have the ball. And so if you're trying to win more games, one of the best things you can do to elevate yourself as a Madden player is to learn advanced clock management, hold on to the ball as long as possible, and keep your opponent from getting the ball as much as possible. And that just makes everything in the game so much easier. Now, moving on to huge mistake number 9, we have not knowing how to play run defense. And I'm sure we've all had one of these games where we're going against someone who we don't think is very good, and we say to ourselves, if I can just get this guy to pass the ball, then I know he'll throw me an interception. But unfortunately, we can't stop his run game, so he never has to pass the ball. There is nothing more frustrating in Madden than that, at least in my opinion. So because of that, I want to go over 4 quick tips to instantly improve your run defense. So tip number 1 is use heavy sets. If you are struggling in run defense, the first thing you should do is simply switch to a heavy set if you're not already in one. Heavy sets are formations that have extra linemen and extra linebackers, like 4-3 and 3-4. The reason for this is hopefully obvious. Linemen and linebackers will shed their blocks much better than defensive backs. And so if you're in a light set like dime or dollar, you run the risk of having your defensive backs just getting completely blown off the ball, and they won't shed their blocks. And as a result, your opponent's run game will be much more effective. Now for tip number 2, always make your opponent run outside. And to do that, I always like to pinch my D line by pressing left on the D-pad and down on the left stick, or pinching my entire defense, which is to press RB or R1 and down on the left stick. When you pinch your D line or you pinch your defense, you make it almost impossible for your opponent to run up the middle. And I mean, they can still try to run up the middle, but as you can see, we've got all these D linemen down here. We got our linebackers in the gaps, and this is going to essentially force them to run outside. And when they run outside, and when you know they're running outside, it makes it much simpler and it makes it much easier to stop, in my opinion. Now, part of the reason it makes it much easier to stop is tip number 3, which is user with a linebacker in the middle of the field, and especially hover over the center or the nose tackle with your user so the green bar appears above your head. When you know your opponent is running outside, and when you can hover with one of these linebackers over the nose tackle or over the center, what it allows you to do is the moment the ball is snapped and you see which way they're going, you can just instantly sprint outside in that direction and try to clean up the run. And so right here, we have our opponent in a halfback stretch going to the right. And when the ball is snapped, we can just instantly sprint to the right And right here, I clicked off of my linebacker, which clicking off, that's a little bit more of an advanced thing that you don't have to do, but you can do it. But as you can see, by just sprinting out to the right, we were able to occupy one of those big blockers who was going to be lead blocking for the running back. And ultimately, we helped collapse the running lane and prevent it from being a big gain. And so this is how I always like to play run defense. I say, if you're going to run on me, you have to run outside. And because I'm pinching my whole defense, all of my D linemen are going to occupy all of your blockers. And now it leaves my user free to get into the running lane. And right there, I guess, of course, if Chris Jones is going to shed, then that makes life easier as well. But even if Chris Jones doesn't come through free, what you can see right there is that this was our user right here, number 32, Bolton, and we are plugging this first running lane. And so maybe they would have tried to bounce it outside, but we were also moving outside anyway in case they took it way outside. And so by forcing your opponent to run outside and then by usering with a middle linebacker and then sprinting outside, it really does make it tougher for your opponent to run the ball on you. But let's say you're doing this and it's not working that great for you. Let's say you're pinching the D line, you're using with the linebacker over the middle, and they are still somehow successfully running an outside run play on you. Well, tip number 4 is blitz your outside cornerback. And obviously, this is a little bit of an extreme type of run defense because if you just look at this, obviously there's no deep blue on that side to guard that receiver if they pass. And so, of course, you may want to roll your coverage accordingly. But if you're in a situation where you are sure that your opponent is running the ball, especially running it to a particular side, if you baseline press and then blitz that outside cornerback, he can blow up stretch runs in the backfield. And look at this right here. We'll look at the replay. Look at what happens when we have that outside cornerback blitzing. And again, because I'm on 2 controllers, I couldn't take control of the running back. But look out there. You can see that cornerback sprint in instantly, and there's nothing that receiver can do. That receiver is supposed to block that cornerback, but he can't get there. And now we're forcing the running back inside into what? There's no running lane there. And so this, of course, is, like I said, it's a little bit of a more aggressive type of run defense. But if you are struggling against halfback stretch and outside run plays, and there is just nothing else you can think of, baseline, press, and outside cornerback on a blitz, and of course, roll your coverage accordingly because you don't want to give up an easy one-play touchdown. But as long as you roll your coverage accordingly, what's really open here? Okay, I guess like the flat on the left side is open, and if they hit you in the flat there, you can adjust on the next play. But this is such a great setup for shutting down an outside run play. And again, I'll say it one more time. They have to run outside because we're pinching the whole defense. If they want to try and run inside, they're certainly free to do so, but we've got a ton of bodies in there, and they're probably not going to be able to find very much space to work with. And so we pinch the defense, we force them to run outside, and then in these extreme cases at least, we blitz the outside cornerback, it cleans up the outside run, and now we are completely shutting down the run game. And finally, guys, huge mistake number 10 that way too many Madden players make is going for too many bombs. And when I say bombs, I'm referring to one-play touchdowns. Obviously, one-play touchdowns are maybe the most fun thing we can hit in the entire game. There's nothing better than launching it 40 or 50 or 60 yards down the field and hauling it in for an easy touchdown. The problem is that too many players attempt them too frequently. And so let's talk about when we should and shouldn't attempt these one-play touchdowns. And so the first scenario where I'd say it's okay to attempt these one-play touchdowns is if your opponent is just using a 3-man rush on every play. As we talked about earlier, 3-man rushes shed much, much slower than 4-man rushes. And so if your opponent is only running a 3-man rush, then you can actually have some confidence that there will actually be time for these bombs to develop. If your opponent is running a 4-man rush, just like we saw before, the sheds on these plays are so strong that even if you keep an extra blocker in, there's no guarantee that you'll have time to get this throw off. And so I'll go ahead and set this one up again real quick. By the way, this is an awesome bomb out of the gun trips tight end formation, and you can do it out of any trips formation. But this is a 4-man rush, not QB contained, with a blocked running back. And we will see if it holds up for us. and it looks like we can't get it off. And that actually was one of the better scenarios where the blocking held up for a little while. Obviously, we had it open, and so it's not like the worst thing ever that we attempted it here. But as you can see, it takes time to develop. Maybe I could have thrown it a little bit sooner, and we'll go ahead and run it again. But in general, one of the biggest issues with attempting these bombs too frequently is simply the block sheds. These 4-man rushes, they just simply shed faster. And right here, I barely got that ball off. We got the touchdown, guys, but I don't know if you saw, I was literally getting hit right as I threw. And so if you're attempting one-play touchdowns too often, you are running a much higher risk of taking a sack or doing a throw out of sack or fumbling with your quarterback. There are so many risky things that can happen if this one-play touchdown doesn't go according to plan. That's the number one thing that we have to worry about with attempting one-play touchdowns. The next thing we have to worry about when attempting a one-play touchdown is, what if it's not the coverage that we thought it was? These setups are typically designed to beat specific coverages, again, like cover 3 or cover 4. And if our opponent is switching their coverages around, then there's a high chance that they will not be in the coverage you need them to be in order for your bomb to work. And so if your opponent is just sitting in cover 3 or cover 4 every single play, then that's a case where, okay, maybe you want to go for the bomb. But if they're mixing up their coverage, especially if they're mixing in both man and zone coverage, then you probably don't want to be attempting these coverage bombs. And the final reason I don't recommend going for these coverage bombs all the time is that they just build bad habits because it forces you to lock in on one receiver, which was one of our mistakes we talked about earlier. When you run this play, obviously you could throw to the in route or the comeback route, but on this setup, you definitely want to throw to the post. I know you guys want to throw to the post because I want to throw to the post too. And so when you run these coverage bombs, it reinforces the bad habit of locking onto one receiver rather than going through a read progression. I always encourage people only use the bombs very occasionally and situationally. Coverage bombs do not replace having a proper offense. And so the coverage bombs are the icing on the cake of a scheme. They are not the main foundation of the scheme. They are super fun, and when they work, they are awesome, but we have to have an actual offense as well in whatever formation we're in. But all that being said, the coverage bombs are still a blast, and if you can hit them in the right situations, then launching these one-play touchdowns, of course, is one of the most fun things we can do in the entire game. But those are 10 huge mistakes that way too many Madden players make. If you guys want even more advanced tips and scheme breakdowns, definitely consider checking out our website, playbookprofessor.gg. We have nearly 1,000 active members and countless success stories from players just like you who started winning more games after joining our community. Right now, you can use code SPRUCE to get 30% off both monthly and yearly memberships on the site. So if you're ready to start winning more games, then we'll see you over there.